My name is Ainsley Vance, and I was 32 years old when I learned how easily someone you love can decide your life belongs to them. I owned my 4-bedroom house outright, a fact that still didn't feel real even after 3 years. I bought it with no inheritance, no financial help, and no safety net beyond my own discipline and exhaustion. For 10 years, I worked as a software engineer, living like a broke college student long after I could technically afford more because every spare dollar went toward freedom. That house wasn't just a building to me, it was proof. Proof that I could build something alone, protect myself, and never owe my stability to anyone else's goodwill. Every wall, every floorboard, every quiet night was earned. Caspian Finch, my boyfriend of nearly 3 years, moved in 8 months earlier. We had discussed it carefully, or at least I thought we had. He made about $42,000 a year as a dental hygienist, and I made significantly more. We agreed early on that he wouldn't pay rent. Instead, he covered groceries and some utilities while I handled the property taxes, insurance, and everything else. It felt fair, balanced, adult. We were engaged after all, wedding planned for the spring, save the dates mailed, venue deposit paid, his suit picked, my dress hanging in the closet, wrapped in plastic like a promise, waiting patiently for its moment. For a long time, things felt good, comfortable, predictable in the way healthy relationships are supposed to be. Then, 3 weeks before everything fell apart, Caspian started acting differently. He took phone calls in the garage, lowered his voice when I walked into a room, ended conversations abruptly, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. When I asked, he brushed it off with a playful tone, telling me he was planning a surprise and that I should stop trying to ruin it by guessing. I assumed it was something harmless, maybe a birthday trip or a small party. I didn't push. Trust makes you generous with silence. Looking back, that silence cost me clarity. The day everything changed was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way until it wasn't. I came home around 6 in the evening, tired, already mentally planning dinner and a quiet night. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed a U-Haul truck parked along the curb. It struck me as odd, but I dismissed it. People move all the time. I had no reason to believe that truck had anything to do with me. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. My living room was full of people I had never seen before. An older couple sat on my couch like they belonged there. A man in his early 20s lounged in my recliner scrolling on his phone. 2 teenage girls stood near my fireplace taking selfies, laughing as if they were on vacation. Boxes lined the walls, furniture had been shifted. A decorative sign hung over my mantel, crooked and loud, reading, "Family is everything." Before I could speak, Caspian rushed out of the kitchen, beaming like a child who couldn't wait to show off a secret. "Surprise," he said brightly. "I wanted everything set up before you got home, but you're early." I stood there, keys still in my hand, staring at the evidence that my life had been rearranged without my consent, my knowledge, and in that moment, before anyone explained anything, before I spoke a single word, something inside me went very still, because deep down, I already knew. I remember blinking a few times, not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because my brain was trying to catch up to the reality in front of me. The house smelled different, like unfamiliar perfume and cardboard and someone else's cooking. Sounds filled the space too, voices, laughter, the scrape of furniture legs against hardwood I had carefully maintained for years. This was my home, yet suddenly it felt like I'd walked into someone else's life mid-scene. "What is this?" I finally asked, my voice calmed in a way that surprised even me. Caspian's smile didn't falter. "They're my family, my mom, my dad, my brother, and my sisters. They're moving in." Moving in. The words landed with weight, each syllable heavy and deliberate, as if he'd practiced saying them until they sounded reasonable. I looked around again, slower this time. The older woman on my couch, his mother apparently, was already standing, arms open, eyes glossy with gratitude. His father loomed just behind her, broad-shouldered, assessing me like a problem to be managed. The young man in my recliner glanced up briefly, bored, then went back to his phone. The twin girls angled their cameras again, documenting everything. "We're so grateful," his mother said, stepping toward me. "Caspian told us you'd be happy to have us here." I took a step back before she could touch me. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut through the room. "Moving in," I repeated, keeping my gaze on Caspian. "You moved 5 people into my house without asking me?" His smile flickered just for a second. "I wanted it to be a surprise. They lost their rental, the landlord sold the building, they had nowhere to go, and we have all this space. I knew you'd say yes." "You knew I'd say yes," I echoed, my voice flat. "Yes," he said quickly, nodding as if that settled it. "We're getting married. It's our home. What's yours is ours." That was the moment something shifted. Not exploded, not cracked, shifted. A quiet, unmistakable realignment of how I saw him. "We're not married," I said, "and this house is in my name. You know that." His father stepped forward then, inserting himself into the space between us. He was tall, solid, the kind of man who relied on physical presence to carry authority. "Now hold on," he said. "We're family. Family helps family. We just need a place to land for a bit, a few months, maybe a year." A year. 5 additional people indefinitely in the home I'd worked 10 years to own outright. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Caspian grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" "I'm calling the police," I said simply. His mother gasped. One of the girls let out a dramatic, "Oh my God!" The phone still pointed at me. His brother finally sat up, interest sparking in his eyes. "You can't do that," Caspian said, panic creeping into his tone. "They're not trespassing. I invited them." "You don't have the authority to do that," I replied, already dialing. "Guests don't arrive with a U-Haul. Guests don't unpack boxes and rearrange furniture." "This is insane," Caspian said, his voice breaking. "I thought you loved me. I thought we were building a life together." "We were until you decided to make a massive life decision without even asking me. That's why I made it a surprise. I knew you'd say no." The line connected. I gave the operator my address and explained that there were unauthorized occupants in my residence who were refusing to leave. As I spoke, the room erupted. His mother started crying loudly. His father began shouting about disrespect and family values. The twins narrated everything into their phones like this was entertainment. When I ended the call, I looked at Caspian and said the words that stopped everything cold. "We're done. The wedding is off." His face drained of color. "You can't be serious. You moved your entire family into my house behind my back. That's not love, that's manipulation." 10 minutes later, when the police arrived, the decision was no longer emotional, it was procedural. Ownership confirmed, authority established, boundaries enforced. As I sat on the porch listening to the chaos inside my house, I realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a test, and he had already decided I was supposed to fail. The police stayed for nearly 2 hours while Caspian's family packed their things back into the U-Haul. I watched from the porch, not out of spite, but because I no longer trusted myself to be inside my own house without something breaking, either a piece of furniture or my restraint. His mother cried the entire time, wailing loud enough for the neighbors to hear. His father argued with the officers until his voice went hoarse. His brother paced the driveway, muttering about lawyers and injustice. The twins filmed everything, occasionally zooming in on my face like they were waiting for me to react the way villains do in movies. I didn't give them that satisfaction. Caspian hovered near me, alternating between rage and desperation. He kept trying to talk, to explain, to justify what he'd done as compassion instead of control. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to discuss. When the last box was loaded and the truck finally pulled away, one of the officers lingered. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Situations like this escalate fast when people try to handle them emotionally." I thanked him, shut the door, and stood in the silence that followed. The sign that read, "Family is everything," was still hanging over my mantel. I tore it down and dropped it in the trash without ceremony. Then I sat on the floor of my living room and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The betrayal, the shock, the grief, and underneath it all, an unexpected sense of relief. Because if Caspian was willing to do this before we were married, I could only imagine what he would have justified afterward. The quiet didn't last long. My phone started lighting up that night. Calls and texts from numbers I didn't recognize. His parents, his brother. One of the twins even sent me a message calling me a narcissist and a monster. I blocked everyone except Caspian, not because I wanted to hear from him, but because I needed a line open for logistics. He still had belongings in my house, and I wasn't interested in being accused of stealing. On the second day, he showed up unannounced. I was working from home when he walked straight into my office like nothing had happened, key in hand, entitlement in every step. "We need to talk," he said. "You should have knocked," I replied, not looking up from my laptop. "I live here," he said. "You did," I corrected. "You don't anymore." He sat across from my desk like this was a negotiation. "I overreacted," he said. "Moving them in without telling you was wrong. I see that now. But you overreacted too, calling the police, canceling the wedding. That's extreme." I leaned back in my chair. "You had a U-Haul. You rearranged my furniture. You hung decorations. That wasn't a mistake. That was a plan you knew I wouldn't agree to, so you executed it behind my back." He tried tears next, apologies, claims of panic, stories about his parents having nowhere to go. "Where are they now?" I asked. "A motel," he admitted. "So they found a solution without my house," I said. "You need to schedule a time to pick up your things this weekend." He stood up, anger replacing sorrow. "You're heartless. You're selfish. This was the worst mistake of my life." "No," I said calmly, "assuming my home was yours to give away was." The next morning, his father showed up at my door at 7 a.m., pounding hard enough to shake the frame. I watched him on my doorbell camera for 2 full minutes before opening it. "You embarrassed my family," he barked. "You called the cops on us like criminals." "You were trespassing," I said. "If you come back again, I'll call them again." His face reddened as he leaned closer, trying to intimidate me into compliance. I closed the door, locked it, and filed a report. By the end of the week, I received a formal letter from a lawyer, demands for money, housing, emotional damages, a request for Caspian to move back in for 30 days. I laughed, then forwarded it to my attorney. What they were calling cruelty was simply me refusing to surrender control of my life, and they hated me for it. The letter from Caspian's lawyers sat on my kitchen counter like a threat dressed up as professionalism. I read it twice slowly, not because I was confused, but because I wanted to be certain I wasn't missing some hidden implication that would suddenly make any of it reasonable. Compensation for emotional distress, reimbursement for financial contributions during the relationship, a reasonable transition period in which Caspian would be allowed to move back into my home for 30 days. Payment for a wedding dress he claimed couldn't be returned. The total amount demanded felt arbitrary, inflated, and deeply insulting. I laughed out loud, then called my attorney. He listened patiently as I read the letter to him, occasionally making a sound somewhere between amusement and disbelief. When I finished, he said, "This is nonsense. He was never on the deed, never on a lease, and this state doesn't recognize common law marriage. Shared expenses aren't loans unless there's documentation. And as for moving back in, absolutely not." Hearing it laid out so clearly was grounding. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't heartless. I was legally and morally within my rights, and Caspian's sudden interest in law had nothing to do with justice and everything to do with leverage. My attorney drafted a response declining every demand and warning that continued harassment would result in a countersuit for legal fees. The letter went out the same afternoon. For a few days, things were quiet. Then the calls started again, this time from unknown numbers. I stopped answering. The messages shifted tone, swinging between guilt and fury, grief and accusation. Caspian's mother left a voicemail telling me I destroyed their family. His brother texted that I should watch my back. I saved everything and forwarded it to my lawyer, who advised me to document and disengage. About a week later, I got a call from a local news station. The reporter introduced herself politely and asked if I'd be willing to comment on a story about a woman who had called the police on her fiancé's homeless family and thrown them out onto the street. Apparently, someone had pitched it as a viral human interest piece. Woman helps family. Cold, successful homeowner refuses compassion. Police drama ensues. I told her I'd be happy to talk. I explained exactly what had happened, that I came home to 5 strangers in my house, that there had been no discussion, no consent, that Caspian had explicitly admitted he did it as a surprise because he knew I'd say no if he asked. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "He said that?" she asked. "Those were his exact words," I replied. The story never aired. Instead, one of the twins posted footage from my doorbell camera of her father confronting me early that morning. The comments were not kind to him. Watching a grown man attempt to intimidate a woman on her own property while demanding she fix a situation she didn't create turned out to be less sympathetic than they'd hoped. By then, Caspian had agreed to pick up his belongings. I packed everything carefully, labeled each box, and stacked them neatly in the garage. I sent him one final message with a deadline and made it clear I wouldn't negotiate beyond that. Saturday arrived with gray skies and a sense of finality. I hadn't expected to feel so empty. He showed up with his brother and his father. I had a friend inside the house with me, and I'd already notified the local precinct. I wasn't interested in being caught off guard again. Caspian barely looked at me as they loaded the truck, making loud, pointed comments about wasted years and heartless people. I didn't respond. I simply watched my life shed itself of someone who had never truly respected it. When they were almost done, Caspian came to the door. "I want the engagement ring back," he said. I told him the law was clear. The ring was conditional. There would be no marriage. His anger flared, then collapsed into something quieter as he walked away. And as the truck disappeared down the street, I realized the story they'd been trying to tell about me had fallen apart. All that was left was the truth. When the truck disappeared at the end of the street, the silence that followed felt different from the one after the police left. That earlier quiet had been raw, vibrating with shock and disbelief. This one was heavier, steadier, like the kind of stillness that settles in after a storm has already done its damage. I closed the garage door, locked it, and stood there for a moment longer than necessary, listening to the sound of my own breathing inside a house that finally felt like mine again. The legal situation unraveled faster than I expected. After my attorney responded to Caspian's lawyer, there was one final attempt to reframe the narrative. Another letter arrived, this one claiming Caspian had tenant rights and that I had illegally evicted him. My lawyer's reply was concise and devastating. Caspian had never paid rent, was never on a lease, and had no tenancy agreement of any kind. Even if he had been considered a tenant, secretly moving 5 additional occupants into the property would have constituted grounds for immediate eviction. The letter ended with a warning: continue and we would pursue legal fees for harassment. After that, there was silence. No more calls from lawyers, no more threats disguised as legal language. Just quiet. About a week later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned that Caspian and his family were now squeezed into his brother's 1-bedroom apartment after the motel became too expensive. His parents were looking for a place of their own, but between the housing market and his father's credit history, progress was slow. Caspian himself had gone from living in a 4-bedroom house to sleeping on a pull-out couch, sharing space with his teenage sisters. I didn't feel triumphant hearing that, but I didn't feel guilty either. Consequences don't require cruelty to exist. They simply arrive when choices collide with reality. I sold the engagement ring a few days later. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it represented a future that was never real. I got $3,200 for it, used part of the money to upgrade my home security system, and set the rest aside for a trip I'd been postponing for years. Something quiet, somewhere far enough away that no one knew my name or my story. The wedding deposits were a mixed loss. Most vendors were understanding. One wasn't. I lost the venue deposit entirely. Caspian's family was supposed to cover half of it, but they never had. I accepted that I'd never see that money again and moved on. Compared to what I could have lost if I'd ignored my instincts, it was a small price. I've heard that Caspian tells people I abandoned him over a misunderstanding, that I was looking for an excuse to leave, that I never really loved him. If that version of events helps him sleep at night, he's welcome to it. I know what happened. The police know what happened. His own lawyer eventually understood what happened, which is probably why everything went so quiet so suddenly. What I learned from all of this is simple. Even if living, it was anything but. When someone makes a massive decision about your life without your consent because they know you would disagree, that isn't love. That isn't partnership. That is control disguised as good intentions. Caspian didn't surprise me with a party or a trip. He surprised me with a fundamental violation of trust, then expected gratitude for it. Some people think I went too far, that I should have talked it out, that calling the police on family was extreme. But the relationship ended long before the officers arrived. It ended the moment Caspian decided my home wasn't mine anymore, the moment he planned and executed a scheme specifically because he knew I would refuse if asked. Everything after that was just paperwork. People ask if I miss him. I miss the person I thought he was, the man I believed I was going to marry. But that person wouldn't have done what he did. So what I'm really mourning is an idea, not a reality. And that's a strange kind of grief, but it's one I can live with. My house is quiet now, just me, the space I earned and the life I protected. I spent 10 years building this foundation. I'm not about to let anyone take it from me without my explicit, enthusiastic, informed consent.